Hi there. So let me narrate a situation to you. Imagine a situation where you're working at your work desk on a fine Monday morning. Suddenly, you experience someone is standing right behind you. You turn your chair to look at that person and you identify that person to be your boss. What is he or she doing there? Basically trying to understand what exactly are you doing at this point in time. Are you doing something professional or are you doing something personal? Are you doing your job exactly how it was supposed to do, and so on and so forth? Not one of those great situations to be in. Unfortunately, a lot of employees across organizations across the world experience this particular factor. This is typically what we call as micromanagement. Micromanagement can be defined in multiple ways, but one of the most simplistic ways of understanding micromanagement is an activity which involves monitoring someone so closely that it can either become intimidating or it can infringe into the personal space of the employee. Now, a lot of leaders tend to resort to micromanagement. But the question is, why do they do it? In spite of the fact that almost everyone in the management world is aware of the fact that micromanagement does not work. So, what happens when people micromanage? First and foremost, when people micromanage, it leaves the team members with a sense of demotivation. It makes them feel that we are not being trusted. We are not being trusted for our ability to deliver performance, or sometimes even worse, we are not being trusted for the ethics or values that we believe in. Perhaps the other person believes that we are unethical or we are doing something which should not be done. Now, feelings like these can make people easily fall victims to demotivation. And when demotivation becomes rampant within the team, it can become the cause of severe stress. The resultant factor, you have attrition that takes place. So, micromanagement is absolutely anti-business. It can lead to a lot of disastrous consequences if not addressed and if not nursed and eliminated at the right time. So let's try to understand, why do then people tend to micromanage? Why do leaders, bosses, managers follow the practice of micromanagement? There could be many reasons, but there are three important factors that actually make people behave in unreasonable ways. Number one is lack of trust. Now, what is lack of trust? Imagine I'm a boss and I don't believe that my people are capable of doing any particular task. Maybe the people in my team require a lot of hand holding. So I would try and observe their activities and try and help them, which is good, nothing wrong with that. But if I try to observe people, monitor their activities every now and then, it could infringe into their personal space, or perhaps it could make life difficult for them. It makes it difficult for them to breathe easily because they're constantly under the scanner. So lack of trust is perhaps one of the biggest reasons why a lot of leaders or managers invariably end up micromanaging. But that's not the only reason. Another reason could be the manager's past experience. Now, what does that mean? If I'm a manager who had a boss who used to micromanage, I usually start to believe that is exactly you need to lead your team. So I start to believe that unless you micromanage, you will not be able to control the direction in which your team or your team members are progressing. So when my boss did it, I found it okay. So if I do it, my people should find it okay. And therefore, a lot of people invariably end up practicing micromanagement, thinking this is the leadership style of managing things, which again is not true. Which brings us to the third reason why people tend to micromanage. And the third reason is quite funny, but it's true. I believe that by micromanaging, I'm helping people. And therefore, I need to do it more often. Now, why would people believe that? It's because I believe that my presence as a senior campaigner within the team is going to help my team members. So they need me to be there consistently. And that's why a lot of people step up, but they never step back. And when they don't step back, it puts a lot of pressure on the team members. Because in my role as a leader, I believe I'm helping them, whereas the reality could be quite contradictory. So these are some of the reasons why people tend to indulge in micromanagement, in spite of the fact that almost everyone is pretty well aware that micromanagement isn't a good idea. But the question is, what can be done to address micromanagement? Now, that is where one needs to focus. the solution. So I'm going to share with you 3 tips which will be useful, not just as an employee, but as an organization, and especially as a leader, for you to address micromanagement. So the first tip is meant for leaders or bosses who are playing the role of a manager. So what do you do to address micromanagement? Now, it's kind of a catch-22 situation, because if you're aware that you're doing micromanagement, you would not do it. You would stop it consciously. But the bad news is, most of us, when we tend to micromanage, we are not even aware that we are micromanaging. So if you're not aware of the disease, how would you go about diagnosing it and solving it? That's a reasonable question. So here is what you need to do more often than not. As a manager, use your feedback sessions very, very effectively, which means every time you're about to give feedback to your people, you must also ask for feedback on your own performance as a leader. That gives people an opportunity to openly talk about any sense of micromanagement that they believe is existing within the team. For instance, when you ask people in the team, hey, do you anytime feel that I tend to monitor you too much, or tend to infringe in your personal space, or I tend to get into your activities a lot more than I should? And if the answer is yes, then that's an indication that you're somewhere ending up into micromanagement. So asking for open feedback in a non-threatening fashion and allowing people to speak up their hearts and minds is one of the most effective ways to identify whether you micromanage or you don't. If you're not, be happy with it. But if you are, thank your stars that somebody opened up about it, and now you can start working on it. But what should you do if you have a boss who micromanages? Very hard to control that, isn't it? But there is something you can do. Unfortunately, a lot of times people end up with a victim mentality. So they'll keep talking to everyone at the workplace about their boss and say that, my boss micromanages me. I'm not happy about it. I feel that there is a lack of trust and things like that. But I won't talk to the concerned person who is my boss. So what can be done is to speak up. Speak up in a non-threatening fashion. Here is how you go about it. So when you are in a discussion or in a conversation with your boss, you might say something like, sir, I respect the fact that you're always willing to extend help to me whenever I get stuck while doing my activities. However, I sometimes get a feeling that you end up spending a lot of time at my desk, or you end up interfering too much, and that gives me a feeling that I'm not being trusted. So I would like to understand, what can we do to avoid such scenarios in the future? Is that an easy question to ask? By no means. It's a tough question. But unless you have this open conversation with your manager, micromanagement might never stop, because the other person is not even aware that he or she is micromanaging you. So talk about it. Speak up. Don't be a victim. What is it that organizations can do? Well, a lot. Organizations need to understand that it is their primary responsibility to create a culture of trust and a culture of belongingness in the organization. So the moment there is a complaint raised about micromanagement, that needs to be addressed with immediate effect. Alongside this, there should also be anonymous surveys which should be conducted from time to time, so that people are able to voice their concerns. And if there are any indications towards micromanagement, organizations need to pull up their socks and take immediate action to solve the problem. These are some of the things that one could practice as individuals or as an organization to address the menace of micromanagement. Remember, nobody likes to be monitored. Nobody likes a satellite hovering around them, observing every piece of action that they are taking. So the next time you identify micromanagement, perhaps you need to raise an alarm bell. So do put these tips into action and tell me how they have helped you to address the problem of micromanagement at your workplace. I wish you all the very best.